Welcome back, everyone. Today we've got a very interesting guest, like always. His name is Ben Veal. And without me introducing Ben, I'm going to ask Ben to introduce himself. So, Ben, let me just ask you this quick question. If you bumped into a stranger and you were to introduce yourself to a stranger, how would you introduce yourself?
Oh man, that's a hard question. Content creator slash storyteller slash purpose driven writer, I guess. I wear a lot of hats from podcasting to writing books to being a PR and marketing consultant. So somewhere in there, telling stories with purpose.
And normally I ask this question at the very end of the podcast, but I'm going to ask it at the beginning because it helps frame the rest of our time here together. If people were to look at this podcast, if they were to listen to this, if they were to listen to this very specific episode, what would you want them to take away at the end?
The thing I have learnt from speaking to 150 people from all kind of walks of life is doesn't matter how successful someone looks on social media or on the outside, we've all really struggled to get where we are today, and we all deal with a lot of things along the way. So I think just wherever you are at in your journey and whether you feel like you're successful or not, just be content that you are actually doing really, really well, and don't compare yourself to other people. That's probably the number one thing I've learned in the last few years.
And that sort of topic or that sort of theme runs, if I'm not mistaken, runs through your own podcast called Good Journeys.
Correct.
So let's talk about Good Journeys for a second. Tell me about what the podcast is. Tell me about how you started it. Tell me about the whole thing.
Well, yeah, so Good Journeys really emerged out of lockdown. So it was in those kind of 2020 and 2021 very strange couple of years we went through. I listened to so many podcasts, but particularly podcasts like I always cite Fern Cotton's Happy Place as an inspiration, or Dr. Chaster's Live Better, Feel More, podcasts which really dive deep with guests and people are very vulnerable on them. My journey with listening to podcasts started a bit before, when I was working here in Bath, and I used to take my hour every single day on my lunch break from my PR job and do the walk around Victoria Park and enjoy this lovely city, but like dive into people's. I really like when people share very openly about the ups and downs of their life, and having been a big consumer of podcasts for a number of years, but also being someone who's always really enjoyed speaking to people and really enjoyed being curious about people's stories, I just thought I can try this. And I had no fancy microphone setup. I had no idea how you make a podcast in any way, shape, or form. What I did have was I'd gotten to know lots of very interesting people, much like you. That you find you learn and you meet people as you go on professionally, and working in public relations for the best part of 20 years, I'd met all sorts of fascinating people. So I thought, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I do know that there'll be some really good stories. So I'm just going to give it a try. And that was 4 years, and now between my two podcasts, 150 episodes ago. And I still don't know what I'm doing sometimes, but it's definitely like been an incredible journey to go on, and I'm so blessed by the people I've got to meet, by the friendships I've made. I mean, you'll know this, like podcasting, having conversations like this, you make lifelong friendships through doing it, because it's a really, you share a lot in conversations like this, and sometimes you share more than you would expect, and that's what makes podcasting so much more special, I think, than radio interviews or magazine interviews or television interviews, is because I think barriers break down in podcasts, and I find with, I've interviewed a fair few celebrities, and I'm sure they've said more to me than they necessarily planned to say, because when you're in this kind of conversation, you do open up more.
Absolutely. And I think looking back at my own sort of like journey, I knew I liked the idea of doing a podcast, and I didn't think, I didn't have any sort of like high level connections or like people I would know to get on the podcast. And I was like, well, I don't need those people, because the everyday, I don't want to use the label like the everyday person, but people with normal lives, or people who are just have a job, or people who are just doing something, whatever that is, they are really interesting as well.
Yeah.
And they've got a good journey. and it's worth sharing about it.
It is, and I think one of the challenges we have when we create content is so much of it is viewed against like the metrics of like how many views it gets, how many downloads it gets, how many likes it gets as a reel or whatever it may be. And so if you're not careful, you get drawn into I just want to interview influential public figures with really big reach, or I just want to interview celebrities because more people will see it. But actually, some of the most special conversations I've had have been with people that have never done a podcast, people who have said to me they were genuinely nervous about being on a podcast. I have joked with them and said I've taken the podcasting cherry of a good few, but of a good few people because they were really worried about doing it and I just said it is literally a conversation. It's exactly the same as you and I would be having over a coffee. It just so happens to be filmed and edited. And some of those ones I've had have been some of the best episodes I've ever done. So every single person has a story. Everyone has overcome really tough things in their life. Everyone's achieved more than they probably thought they ever could imagine when they think about it. But sometimes you need someone to sit you down and ask the questions. I don't think as human beings we're often we're not very good at kind of celebrating our own successes and patting ourselves on the back. We're moving from one thing to the next to the next. Sometimes need someone else to say, I think you're doing amazingly, and how did you get there?
Absolutely. I think there's two things you said there that I find myself saying the same things. Number one, when you invite someone on the podcast and they have reservations or they're feeling maybe a bit anxious or maybe a bit, oh, do I want to do this? It's going to be recorded. It's literally just a chat between two individuals. It's the most basic form of what this actually is. And yeah, it just happens to be recorded. Okay, no big deal. Like, okay. And the second thing you said that I thought was interesting as well was, I now slipped my mind. It'll come back. Oh yeah, no, it's just come back. Yeah, exactly. You sit down with someone. I would find myself sitting down with someone. I would be like, well, I've invited you on the podcast because I think what you're doing is really cool, right? And it's exactly that, pointing things out or asking a question that will make the guest feel like, actually, I'm actually done quite a few cool things. And they don't realize it until they sit down and they talk about, sometimes in detail, of how they've got there. And it's absolutely like you watch them sort of like go through it, and it's like, it's so cool, and they realize it, and it's like even the whole episode sort of like changes as soon as it clicks in their head that, actually, wait a second, like, this is actually quite cool.
Yeah, and also, I mean, a lot of people have kind of said to me, like, how do you know all these incredible people that make up this book? Well, I had a few connections, but a very small handful of people. Once you build a platform, like I've built a platform and you've now built a platform with this wonderful podcast, it becomes a lot easier because once you've got proof of concept, once I had 10 or 15 episodes, I could start getting in touch with people who were, public figures with millions of followers, but I could contact them and say, I have a podcast called Good Journeys. It's about this, and I think you're inspiring because of this. Can we have a conversation? And it's amazing. I think a lot of people have said to me they've been surprised at how easy it is actually once you've got a podcast to find people. I've been surprised at some of the people that I've got to have conversations with. This is both, in the entertainment world and then as I've morphed into the professional wrestling world, how quickly I've built up a platform because I think people like the fact that my shows are about genuinely talking about real life, and it's not about, someone might come on because maybe they've got a new book out or they've got a new film out, and so there is a reason because they're on a media tour. But actually at heart I want to explore the person they are, not the product they're trying to shill, and I think that's quite refreshing for a lot of people.
You've mentioned a couple of times now. Let's just go to the book. Tell me about the book. Like, what I know a bit about the book because the first time you and I sort of like met, I attended one of your talks.
Yeah.
But tell me about your book.
So Good Journeys. 25 inspiring people, 75 lessons learned. So this book is basically, it's a bit like a mixtape. That's how I describe it. Like, it's a mixtape of inspiring people's experiences. So 25 people that I have met along the way and who I have podcasted with over the last 4 years. People from all walks of life, from athletes to activists to everyday heroes, kind of going back to what you were saying, people that maybe haven't got a huge social media reach but have got fascinating stories. And what I've done with them is sit down and kind of distillate very, very kind of top level, what was their story, what obstacles did they each go through, and what did they learn. So every single chapter ends with 3 life lessons, because I wanted this book to be something that what you can take as a journal. I wanted it to be something that you can scribble all over, that you can read a chapter before bed, or read one chapter with your morning coffee. Written as much as anything for busy people with busy lives. So something that's really, really accessible, that you could read the whole thing in a day and like really blitz it, but also you could really savor it. I always love I like it when you can just like read a chapter or something just before you go to bed. So it's a soothing book. It's a challenging book. There's some heavy stuff in there. From my own journey with losing my dad and people I connected with along the way, such as Sir Terry Waite, who wrote the foreword. There's a lot in there about neurodiversity, about lessons in ADHD and autism, which is something my family and myself have gone through. There's stuff in there's heavy stuff in there, but at the same time, there's also an awful lot of light. There's how do we define success? What is happiness? Designing, incredible guy who designs incredible work for charities in my local area, and how he approaches the design process, authors and how they approach writing, athletes, how they've overcome things. It's a real collection of people you'd never expect to see in one place together, but they've been brought together by, I guess, me as the central voice. And that was really underpinned when I did the book launch a couple of months ago, and six of the chapters, I guess, 6 of the people were all there in the same place. And it was a bit like being at a wedding. I was like, you guys have no business ever being together, but they've been brought together by this book. And so that's kind of what I hope it does. I hope it introduces people to some other amazing people. I hope that people kind of read a chapter and go, oh, wow, I didn't know anything about Pete Warmby or Rachel Bright or Ryan Hartley or whoever it may be, but now I'm going to research them and find out more. So it's a special book. I still feel a bit in shock that it exists. I feel it's quite surreal to be here talking about it with a physical pile of them. It's very much a manifestation of something I was working through for a long, long time that is out in the world now, and it's crazy that people are reading it.
I think what I love about what you said just now is you get to pick up the book, whether that is before you go to bed or when you have your morning coffee, and read a chapter of someone's life. And it's actually, I think you say it very well, very well. It's connecting and finding out about other people.
Mm-hmm.
And in a world where you see the thing that's obviously on the news or on the internet pretty much every day now is artificial intelligence, and how some people are saying, oh, it's going to take away our jobs, and some people are saying, well, you can use it as a tool. And then you combine that with, for the past 5-6 years now, people are sort of like worried about what Instagram, TikTok are doing to kids, and not just to kids, to people, because exactly. And we then forget about, we all get caught in that sort of like world, and you sort of forget at some point that the person sat across from you is just another human being with actually a really interesting story if you're gonna listen to it. And with your book, I think that's what I like about it. I think that, yeah, that's the idea of it that I like, is the fact that you get to read someone's story, and it then makes you wanna maybe reach out and like ask more questions, right?
Yeah.
And you're sort of like, you've provided this sort of platform that then people can come to and say, actually, I think Ben was a really interesting guest. I want to reach out to Ben and find out more. And maybe we don't have to collaborate, but I just want to find out more about Ben and his journey. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I guess loads of questions there, but in the 25 stories and the 75 lessons you've put in the book, have you seen any sort of like patterns? Because as you've said, you've interviewed people who are professional athletes. You've interviewed people who go and have a normal job, and you've interviewed people who are celebrities, and in both the world of, I guess, the world and also wrestling. And have you seen any sort of like patterns when you were writing this book or when you have your interviews?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really big things that comes through is the fact that, as I said at the start, we all compare ourselves and none of us feel like we're doing good enough. And all of the people I've spoken to, that's been a recurrent theme, really, that you've this sense that no matter what they've achieved, it wasn't quite as much as, even if they've massively exceeded their goals. I think that is one thing. We're always comparing ourselves to other people. The other thing that kind of jumped out, and this came through quite a lot of stories in the book, is that we're all genuinely on a journey of kind of trying to, kind of becoming who we are. So this idea that like there's a finish line. I think certainly growing up, I was very much schooled in, you get a good education and then you get a degree and then you get a good job and then you get married and then you have children and buy a house or whatever order, and then you work to what you stay in your job for 30 years, then you get the gold watch and the pension and the retirement. Like, it was very much kind of, you do all these things. And I think what I've seen through working in good journeys, my own personal journey, speaking with so many people, is most people are still just trying to figure it out. Most people are quite confused about where they're going. Most people are possibly a little bit restless with where they are. And I don't know how much of that is kind of because of society today and the things you were talking about and the fact that we are permanently online, permanently connected, permanently seeing other people's lives, whether they're people we've really opted into seeing or not. I think that's one of the things that's massively changed and become very challenging in the last few years, is that social media isn't really what it used to be, in terms of, it used to be like, if I was interested in you, then I would follow you and I would be showing your content and your photos. Now you can just pay money and force yourself on me. And I think that is kind of, that's the challenge, is that like we're kind of bombarded from the second we turn on our phones with influencers, messages, these hyper kind of unbelievably kind of sophisticated systems that know exactly what our insecurities are. To give an example, I am a early 40s tired dad of two who is struggling with energy and who is struggling with, weight gain. I haven't got the figure I used to have because I don't have the time and the energy that I used to do to put into exercise. And so I get bombarded every single day, 20 times a day with, eat this gummy and suddenly you'll be a new man again, or, I'm this personal trainer, and it's so focused on, you are a 40-year-old man and I'm going to solve this problem for you. And I think that's one of the things that's hard to navigate, is this kind of feeling all the time that you're not good enough. And that's one of the things I wanted to get across in the book. That's one of the things I try and get across in both of the podcasts and just everything I do, just to be really proud of what you've achieved and where you are and whatever stage that is. And I do that as much as anything for myself, to remind myself every day, because I am literally my own worst critic. I'm always kind of criticizing everything I do. I'm always thinking it's not good enough. And so kind of writing the book was actually quite cathartic for me. At some point, I'll read the book back in a non-editing mode, and I might even, sink in a bit more than it has. But listening to these lessons helped me to kind of be like, oh, actually, maybe I need to go a bit easier on myself and just be happy with exactly what I've done.
I think as you were saying that, the first idea or thought that came to mind was, you write that you grow up and you think, I wanna reach this goal. Let's call it the goal, and then you reach it, and without even realizing it, you want more, or you want something else, and then you move that goalpost further and further, and you sometimes don't, as you've said, you don't celebrate where you've got to, and you move the goalpost further and further, and you think, oh, I want to be doing this, it's not enough. My own worst critic, right? I wonder, do you think is there something around we do that because we want people to see what we're doing, where instead we shouldn't be looking for that external validation. We should rather look for that internal validation. I guess what you're talking about with not being your own critic anymore, so like enjoying where you are. Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so to give an example, right? So this other kind of curious strand that my life has got in, which is that I'm now a professional wrestling journalist and professional wrestling author. Now that came back from, I was 9 years old when I wanted to be a professional wrestling journalist. I was watching American wrestling in the early 90s, this escapist world with these larger than life like cartoon characters. And at 9 years old, I thought I want to write for this wrestler magazine, and that's what I want to do for a job. I never aspired to be a wrestler. I just wanted to write about them. 30 years later, that's exactly what I'm doing now. I'm interviewing wrestlers, I'm writing their autobiographies. You know, like this guy I brought along. So this is Wild Man Mark Merrow. This is the figure I had as a kid. You know, and I've now become very close friends with Mark and written his life story. You know, and these things, like, you get so caught up in like how many copies your book sells, or how many views a YouTube video gets, or where you are in a podcast charts, to just be like, I just had a moment recently where I was like, wow, I can't believe I just got to spend 2 hours like talking to this guy who I was growing, you know, like I get to do this every week now, spend hours online with people who I grew up idolizing. And now I just talk to them as normal people and have nice conversations and a value exchange. And I have to remind myself, actually, that's the win. Whether one person watches the end conversation or a million, the win really is that I got to do that, and I got to have that moment and that shared experience with them. And I think I'm starting to, I think after doing it for so long, I'm starting to actually just appreciate this is what it is right now. Getting to do this with you right now, having a reason to do this is enough. And I almost think it would be nicer if you couldn't see the metrics. Like, I'd almost like to just like throw a podcast out and not know whether anyone had downloaded it. For ignorance is bliss, but unfortunately the world of content is, it's all metrics, and you know exactly how well something is done. And I think for me, like, it was the same with a book, it's the same with a podcast. If 10 people read this book, but 10 people are positively impacted by it, versus 1,000 people buy the book and it just sits there on a shelf, I'd far rather take the 10 and have people actually engage with it. And it's the same with a podcast. I'd rather have a loyal listenership who really appreciate when every episode comes out. And with Good Journeys, you know, it's recently the podcast has relaunched to go with the book, and I've brought a co-presenter on in Sarah Moon, who's a local marketing specialist who's just a bundle of energy and great conversationalist. And that was because I was wrestling with burnout. I was really, really tired. I'd just lost my very good friend Dr. Stu, who is the last chapter in this book, who passed away last year. I was just really, really tired. I didn't think I had it in me anymore to do these conversations with inspiring people. But I didn't want Good Journeys to end. Like, it took a pause, but I didn't want it to end because I was really proud of what it was becoming. Having Sarah has added not only a whole new dimension, but it's also like opened us up to a whole new audience, because Sarah's got her own, she's very well known, she's got her own network, and loads of people have got in touch with her and said, oh, I've never listened to a podcast and now I'm listening to yours every time. And I love that, because hopefully some of those people will go back and they'll listen to the earlier episodes that were recorded. But also it's just, it's really special to know that people are listening to our conversations. And it's like this, what we're having today. You have no idea who's going to listen to this or watch this.
Pretty much.
I find that pretty amazing.
Pretty much. And I think the reason why I started a podcast was back in 2024. So I moved to the United Kingdom back in 2020 at the peak of, just when COVID started. And 4 years later, I graduated.
That wasn't a great time to move here.
I'll be honest, everyone, I was like, as a side note, everyone says that, right? Everyone says the exact same line. It wasn't a great time to move. Correct. You would like to think that, but actually, the reality was this. Once you move into your accommodation, everyone else is moved in with you. Now, they can't really, it wasn't really allowed for people to like mingle outside of your own sort of like bubble.
Yeah.
And that sort of like brought everyone in the block where we were living much, much closer. And we were throwing parties pretty much every weekend. So it was actually quite fun. And second year was sort of like a continuation of that.
Yeah.
So it was actually quite fun because otherwise, what would have happened is people would have just not become as close as they had as otherwise they would have been, and it would have been a bit harder. But actually, it was quite nice because you're always close together.
And there were amazing things that came out of that time, which was awful in so many respects, and which we're still feeling like knock-on effects of society years on. But I write about it in the book. One of the best friendships I built up during that time, a guy called Robin Worrell, who's in the book. Me and Robin met every single week at 4:15 on a Wednesday and went for a walk for an hour and a half. We made it this rigid thing that we did, but we developed a friendship, and we got to know each other. That wouldn't have happened outside of that time. There was nothing else to do. You couldn't just go to coffee shops. You couldn't go to anything else. You couldn't fill your day. So we made a commitment, and that routine helped a lot. It's like I was saying to you, we're recording this now because we have Friday night movie night at home. Friday night movie night was a thing that happened during the pandemic, and we carried it on because you needed to differentiate Friday from Saturday to Sunday when you were locked in a house. And I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing today, podcasting, if it wasn't for that time. I think it was the great equalizer in many ways. Like this idea that you can have Zoom calls with celebrities, or that you can. I know people were doing it before, but I mean, I remember using Zoom maybe for work like a month before the pandemic. Like it wasn't a thing to say, let's jump on a Zoom call together. It became a thing because it was the way that families stayed together and businesses stayed together. So I don't think I would be doing anything that I'm doing now if it wasn't for how the world changed. That being said, I think it did also make us so reliant on tech that maybe we have forgotten just how special it is to be doing what you and I are doing right now. And in an ideal world, all of my podcast episodes would be exactly like this right now, what we're doing here, because there's no substitute for sitting face to face with someone else. But I've worked around what I've got, and one of the things that I like to have on both my podcasts is a lot of international guests, especially with Wrestling Life. Nearly all of my guests are in America, so it is what it is, and I've just got very used to doing it over a computer screen.
That's fair. We'll get into wrestling in a bit as well. I don't know if I asked you this earlier or if you actually answered the question, but why did you start the podcast? Because you started during the pandemic. Why did you start it? Because you don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to start a podcast, and then be like, it's going to be about this.
No, I think I was inspired by these other shows. So like The Happy Place that I mentioned, and shows where famous people were coming, because they were generally famous people that were coming on to things like Fern Cotton's show. Famous people were coming on, but then they were being very raw and open about their feelings. And I was learning a lot about myself through listening to these podcasts. And it just got me thinking, the thing that I've always done in my career, so working in public relations for best part of 20 years, where I've always fitted into my job is I'm usually the person who interviews the founder or the CEO or whoever it may be at the top of the company about why they have the company, like what the purpose of the company is behind, because every company pretty much is set up originally to do something beyond make money. It might evolve into that, but every founder has a reason they started doing what they did. And I was always a person that kind of was tasked with pulling that story out and then putting that onto paper. And I thought, and over the years, I've kind of got quite used to like what are the questions you should ask someone, because it is about leading in with stages. If you just say to someone immediately like, what's the meaning of your life? What does success look like? You have to build up in stages. And so what I learned was I developed a set of skills as a conversationalist that made me quite good with asking questions. And I thought, I've got to try this because I love podcasts myself, and I think they're a very special medium. I will try it. But was there a grand plan? Not really. I did somewhat think that it could be a feeder into my business. So people would see how good I was at interviewing and writing, and then that might end up leading to me writing for companies. And then as it evolved, because I just started to get attracted to interesting people, I didn't niche it down. And I'm glad I didn't niche it down. But if I had just said, like, this is going to be a podcast for the Southwest creative industries, and I'm going to interview just founders of Southwest creative businesses, then yes, I probably could have got a very, very good pipeline of work coming out of that. But I didn't. One week I'm interviewing a wrestler, the next week it's a surrogate mother, the next week it's an artist, the next week it's an activist. So it's a very broad brush, really, Good Journeys. And as a result, I've just kind of, I think it's taken me in places I didn't expect I'd go. So I had no intention but I would write books. I guess I did when I was a kid, but I certainly wasn't planning to write a book, let alone a few of them. It's all just kind of happened organically, and it's the same as, I'll be fascinated to see what you're doing in 2 or 3 years' time from where you are at this stage now, because you don't really know who you're going to meet doing this, and you don't really know what it will open up, and you don't know who will see your content. And that's the really special thing about the world we're in today, is in you literally have no idea. And I can say this from putting out thousands of YouTube videos now. You have a slight inkling, but you can very rarely work out what's going to go viral. And I spoke to so many people who are YouTubers with millions of subscribers who will say to me, the things that have gone viral are things they put barely any thought into. Like, it's so unpredictable, and sometimes you just catch absolute lightning in a bottle, and you don't even plan to. I've had some videos which have gone viral, which I just threw out there, and ones which I thought were going to be amazing, and they've sunk. So I find it fascinating, thinking you don't know where a conversation is going to go, and you don't know where it's going to lead to.
Absolutely. And I think the reason why I started a podcast, I didn't start a podcast to think, right, how can I monetize it? Because even now, I don't want to monetize it because it would require, it would break the magic of the conversation, right? I would have to, I'm thinking, I would have to probably over-engineer how the conversation would go. I would have to always look out for those sound bites, and it sort of like makes the whole thing a bit colder. The reason why I started the podcast, for example, in my case, is because in 2024, when I graduated, all my friends, they not decided, but they went away. They went to other places. So, like, for example, London. And I was sort of like left here in Bath by myself. And I was like, well, all my friends are gone now. I'm about to start to go back to the job I had been, that I had on my placement. And I was like, well, what to do now? And I had the idea of starting a podcast in 2024, but I didn't start until 2025. And the whole idea of the podcast was, apart from putting someone in a position where they can give value, was how can I go out there and just meet some other people, meet some cool people, and make some connections, and sort of like go from there. And as you were saying earlier, it's hard sometimes. It's because we've made it hard, I think. It's hard sometimes to sort of like stop and think, actually, why am I doing all of this? Do I care about the views? Do I care about the likes? Do I care about how many people stay and actually watch the video and how long they take to watch it? Like, do I actually care about that? And it's easy to forget why I'm doing all of this. And it's exactly true. I'm doing it, and I have to remember every now and again that I'm doing it because I want to meet people, and that's the exciting bit. And like you said, and you don't have to do this. You can do like anything that you have an idea of that you wanted to do it. Because in my case, in your case as well, from what I'm hearing, once you start doing it, you never know what could happen.
Yeah.
You never know, and that's the most exciting thing. Because for example, I was in a place where I was like, okay, I'm doing a podcast now. What do I want to do with it? And I think it was in December of last year when I was thinking to myself, well, I'm meeting like one person a week, maybe one person every 2 weeks, because I do a podcast every 2 weeks. And how can I sort of like increase that input? And I was like, okay, maybe I don't know what I could be doing here, but let me see if I can organize a meeting. That's like too formal. If I can organize a meetup between 4 guests who've been on the show, and basically connect them, and have that like in a restaurant or a pub, and have a nice more of an in-depth conversation with everyone, but together. And as I was about to do that, one of my friends comes up to me and says, Luca, do you know this guy and this book? And I was like, no. And the book is called no, sorry, that's the title. the book is called 2 Hour Cocktail Party by someone called Nick Gray, American guy. And in the book, the guy basically describes, it gives you a blueprint of how to run cool, great parties and have fun. And I was like, that is so cool. And in the book, he was like inviting 15, 20 people. I was like, I can do that. So since January, I changed the whole format. I had sent out the invoice to the four people I wanted to do this with. And a month later, I changed the full format. I was like, let me do this at another level. Let me invite more people and let me change the format.
Yeah.
And every month since then, I've organized parties where I have 15, 20 people and we're just having a good time for 2 hours. And it's worked out incredibly well. And I've met some really cool people off the back of it. And like you said, you make long lasting friendships and relationships. And it's the most wonderful thing ever because you never know who you might bump into or whose story you might hear or who you might even who might even come to your next podcast or party for that matter.
Yeah, and people don't forget that. I mean, no one who attends one of those things, no one who's invited on your podcast will forget that you made that effort. I think we all remember kind of kind gestures and when people give us good experiences. So I think that will reflect really well on you, and I'm sure there'll be. I'm a big believer in universe connections, that you meet people at the time you're supposed to meet them, and that people come into your life at certain points, and sometimes you're not quite ready for them, but maybe you're ready for them a few years later. So I'm sure some of those people that have come to your parties will either end up being on this podcast or there'll be some other kind of fortuitous reason for you to speak again. But I mean, Bath is an amazing city for that as well. I love coming into the city. I worked here for so many years, and there's just so much kind of creative energy and just a feeling of kind of optimism and like you can do anything here. I love it. It's just something about being so steeped in history, like this incredible place we're recording out of today. It's very special.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. One thing that I have to ask you this because I am sort of not battle. I'm sort of like battling with the idea, and I'm not entirely well. I have a plan of what to do, and you've sort of like done it. You've taken your podcast, obviously. You've taken something you liked, and then obviously that you've met a lot of people, and thanks to that, you've now in a position where you have released 2 books, and you have obviously founded your own company. Because sometimes you have to think, well, I'm doing all of this, and I might I'm enjoying this right now a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I also have a day job, and sometimes I would like go home and think, I like doing this a bit more sometimes than maybe doing my job, but I can't drop my job obviously because that pays the bills. So how did you sort of like find a way to take your passion and work with it in such a way that you can that passion can actually pay the bills or bring you some sort of financial benefit without losing the passion, obviously?
It's the hardest thing in the world, because if I had not done the podcast, not written the books, not done anything in the world of wrestling, and I had just stuck to exactly what I was doing in 2020 when I first set up the business, financially, I'm sure I'd be in a much stronger position. I'm sure my business would be in a far stronger position, but I think I'm a much broader and more interesting person for having done these different things. I think that I actually now offer something very different to my clients because I'm also an author and a podcaster. So I've had all these different experiences which have made me a better communicator. The hardest part in the world is, of course, when you find something you are so passionate about, but you still need to do the day job. The key there is to hopefully make the day job really enjoyable as well. So over time, with Second Mountain, I only work with 5 clients at most, and they all have to be clients where our purpose is aligned, where I really believe in what they're doing and where I'm excited about the product or brand I'm working with. So I genuinely really enjoy the work I do generally that I get paid to do. It's not always easy because of course it's work and it's challenging, it's using the grey cells, and sometimes of course I'd rather just sit outside all day reading a book and not working, but I genuinely enjoy the work. And so that's the key thing for me, is there isn't like a massive disconnect between the two things, whereas for many years I was doing jobs for other people where I didn't really want to be there and I was counting the clock to a degree. And, I do genuinely enjoy the work I do because I like my clients and have good relationships. The challenge with kind of a world of writing and content creation is it can get away from you, because if you get into like a flow state, which I get into often, where you are just like absorbed and suddenly you've lost 2 hours, and that's 2 hours that probably isn't monetized. And if you were to look at what you should be earning per hour versus what you've just spent creating a reel or whatever it may be, there is no trade-off. You have to do it because you enjoy it. If you look at it from a monetization standpoint, it just gets really, really challenging. But that being said, I went in with Wrestling Life when I launched my second podcast 3 years ago. I did that very much with a commercial mindset. So I wanted to still have absolutely the same kind of conversations on good journeys. I wanted to ask these larger than life wrestlers about their real lives, about their struggles with addiction, about struggles with family breakdown, about what it's like when you leave behind this incredible art form of entertainment and enter normal life again, all the challenges that go with that. But I also knew that wrestling is very niche, but it's also a very, very big industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's one of the things that Netflix has paid out more for than anything else is WWE. It's a huge, huge business. And so I did go into it commercially thinking there is an opportunity here. If I can be a really good interviewer and create good content in that space, then I should be able to monetize it. And that is what I've done to a degree. It's certainly not, paying my mortgage, but it's at least cost offset now. The time I spend on it is at least, I'm getting that money back. And hopefully it will only grow from there as well. Like the kind of people I've got to interview, it gets bigger and bigger every month, and it surprises me. The thing that surprises me is it's getting easier and easier to find the guests. The first year of doing it, wrestling is a very, very, very closed industry, as I imagine if you were trying to break in as, I don't know, a football podcaster interviewing ex-footballers, or you did something on musicians or film stars, whatever it may be. Wrestling is very, very closed. It's very, very built on trust. It's like a real brotherhood, and it doesn't really like outsiders. And the first year I found it very, very hard. Like I was really trying to like explain, this is who I am, this is the kind of show I want to do, this is the experience I'll give you. After a point in time of doing that, I then found that wrestlers would just text other wrestlers and just say, oh, just did Ben's show, you should do it, it was good. And so many of my interviews I get now are literally, I get a text out of the blue from someone who 30 years ago I was watching on television saying, yeah, it's so-and-so here, I'll do your show. Very, very informal. And so the trust has been, but the trust has been earned because I have had 120 episodes now where I have taken a lot of time to be respectful, to research, to ask good questions, not just the obvious questions, and to follow up afterwards and make sure it was a good experience. And crucially, I think the thing that is missing too often, to actually thank every single guest afterwards, to actually take the time to write them each a really nice email and explain what I took away from the show and how grateful I was for their time. Because I think that is the bit that possibly is a little bit missed in podcasting sometimes, is it shouldn't be transactional. It's a real relationship. These things are conversations, and everyone gets value from you get value from me being on your show. I get value from being on your show. It's very much a value exchange, and it takes a lot of time on all parties. So I'm just very respectful. I'm very grateful to everyone that's been on my show. Really grateful to everyone that agreed to be in the book, because I didn't know how that would land with people. So really grateful that 25 people agreed to be part of this book, and kind of excited to see where it goes from here.
Why wrestling?
Wrestling. Why did I get into wrestling, or why do I got into wrestling? Like many, many kids in the early 90s. Obviously, I'm older than you, but in the early 90s, World Wrestling Federation was huge. It was up there with Ghostbusters, Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, He-Man. It was, everyone had the sticker albums, everyone had the figures. There was an 7, 8, 9 years old, 1991, 1992. It was really pop culture. It was they had a song in the top 10 of the charts. Wembley Stadium, they were selling out. It was huge. So I got into it in the same way as everyone else. I collected the stickers in the playground. Everyone else then kind of moved away from it really quickly and moved on to the next thing. I didn't. I suddenly realised that because I'd grown up like loving fantasy films and loving, as I say, things like Ghostbusters, things that are a little bit outside the norm. And what I loved about wrestling was it was real people, but they're not real people. They're real people who are like so amplified. They're real people who wear these, everyone thinks, if you think wrestling, everyone thinks of Hulk Hogan, this larger than life giant man who's a man mountain with this big Fu Manchu mustache and yellow pants. They were all these incredible characters. And so as a kid, it was really appealing because they were like real life superheroes. As I got older, and the other thing is when I was a kid, I thought it was all real. So it was presented as, in that time, it was presented as real. And so you thought legitimately so-and-so was beating so-and-so in this athletic contest. When I started to learn more about what it actually was, and the fact that most of these people are really good friends and they're looking after each other, and it's this really incredible athletic form of ballet, basically. Like they're working through a sequences of moves that they often work out as they go on the fly. I just had so much more admiration for it. And then I started to learn about how success isn't necessarily defined by how good you are, but about how you're written for in a television show, because that's essentially what it is. Then it becomes even more interesting because then you realize it's all about politics and it's all about who likes who and who doesn't like who. So it's like a real life soap opera. And as the years have gone on, I definitely view it in a very different way. I watch very little of it now. Is ironically, I barely watch any wrestling now. But I found my niche, which is generally finding people from the 1980s and the 1990s who are retired and who've been away from it for quite a while, talking to them about their life, sharing memories, and about how being involved in that business has affected them. Because a lot of them ended up, pretty penniless. A lot of them went through some very, very tough times to be, where they are now. And yeah, it's curious. I certainly didn't think I'd be doing it for a semi-living. Even though I've always been a fan, it's always been a really big part of my life. It caught me by surprise that I would end up having a podcast about it. And that only really happened after I lost my dad 3 years ago very suddenly. And it was probably an element of not fully accepting what was happening and processing the grief, because he passed away in June and by September I'd launched a wrestling podcast, so it's clearly a distraction. But it was also, I think there was this element where I was like, I've kind of always wanted to do this. I should just do it now. I'm not going to worry about what people, if people make fun of me, then so be it. That's their problem. It's not my problem. And the thing that has amazed me, and I want to, if anyone listening to this takes one thing away about following your passion, I don't think anyone, at least to my face, has actually openly mocked the wrestling life stuff I do. The general consensus is, oh, that's really cool. You interview WWE wrestlers. How did you get into that? A few people will say, like, oh, did you want to be a wrestler, in a slightly mocking way? But because I think people just respect the fact that you're doing something that you like. And I do think we're in an age now where, all the tools exist to follow your passion now, don't they? We all have access to all these incredible things online where we can make these things happen. And I just kind of want to encourage people, whatever your niche is, or whatever your passion thing is, and just try, and you don't necessarily have to make a career of it, but you can certainly put your own stamp and mark on it.
100%. And I think looking at podcasting, but not necessarily just at podcasting, look at the guests you've had on, for example. I could sit here, and if I hadn't done a podcast, I could sit here and ask you, well, I would love to do what you're doing, but how do I have access to someone like Mark Merrow? Or how would I have access to wrestlers who are, in my mind, are like they're celebrities. Like how do I even get to, how can I message them? Like, and it's as easy as literally send a message. Find an email.
Instagram direct messages. I had this conversation with someone recently who genuinely thought that I had a little black book of celebrities because they just assumed, for the people I've interviewed, they assumed there was some like magic ingredient. I was like, no, literally, I have direct messaged people with millions of followers and said, this is who I am. I'd like to interview you about this. And I've just taken my time to think about what the interesting thing is. And I've had plenty of people on my podcast who have just directly responded to me. Instagram's great because loads of celebrities manage their own Instagram. That's one thing that surprised me. Like, it seems to be like the social media that like goes through the slide. A lot of celebrities like do genuinely run their own or check their own DMs. So I've got loads of people just by find. It's very easy to find people's email addresses, find a publicist's email address. But the key is you've got to have a reason to want to speak to them, and that reason can't just be, I'm a fan of yours. I want to, it's got to be, it's got to be because you've seen something they are putting out there into the universe, and you have an emotional attachment to it, and that's kind of so my first book, I brought along my props. So this is my little Mark Mero figure, and this is the book that I ended up writing. So Mark Mero with Ben Veal, Bad to Good, the inspiring story of a wrestling wild man. And I did an interview with Mark because Mark is a former wrestler. He's a former Golden Gloves boxing champion. But for the last 20 years, he has become America's leading motivational speaker for young people. He travels around not only the US, but around the world, speaking to auditoriums full of young people, specifically teenagers, about overcoming hardship, about depression, about suicidal ideation, about mental health, all these kind of really tough stuff. And he's just inspired thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of young people over 20 years. That's what interested me. And yeah, I wanted to talk to him about his wrestling stuff, and we did. But after we did a podcast together and we had such a wonderful connection on that podcast, I just phoned him up and I said, this is really out of the blue, but I've always wanted to write a book and I think I'd like to write yours. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And it was as simple as that. I literally just asked a question. And from there, we wrote a book together, a book I'm really proud of. So the worst that happened is he goes, no, thank you. And I don't write that book. So sometimes you just got to ask the question.
One of the things you said is when you send your messages, you try to give a reason, and if you like someone, you try to find why do I like them and what would I actually want to talk with them on the podcast. And you try to make it obvious and you try to make that connection so they can see actually, yeah, this guy has done some research and actually that's a pretty cool topic and I do want to talk about it. Do you find yourself also putting in a message something along the lines of, by the way, here are the benefits if you come on the podcast? I'm just asking for myself now just because I'm sort of like testing, well, I've been testing sort of like different messages I could send to people because there are some people out there who I would really love to talk with and they don't always reply. So it's always a case of follow up. And at some point they will reply. And what I'm looking for here is it just as simple with you as making it obvious and making that sort of like connection to something interesting that they put out in the universe? Or do you also like sometimes specify, here are the benefits that if you were to come to the podcast?
I did a little bit of a wrestling one at the start, so not with Good Journeys. I think because of how Good Journey started. But for wrestling one, I would talk a bit more about kind of co-creation of content. So if you work with me, you'll get a certain amount of collaborative posts because content is currency for if you're in the public eye. We all need content to fuel our socials, but not really. I've tended to use the social media accounts as social proof. So this is at Good Journeys Pod, and if they click the @ handle, they can immediately get a sense of how the content is of the kind of people who've been on there. I think I've been lucky generally with a number of people that have given their time, and I think once you've got that certain amount of which will absolutely happen for you if it hasn't already, once you cross a certain point, it does become easier. And I would say generally follow up with someone once and then move on. In all honesty, that's not the right timing. That's not the right fit or whatever. Because there are plenty of amazing people you can speak to, and you might find I'm now getting people onto Wrestling Life that I was so determined to get on 3 years ago. I interviewed someone last week, a wonderful chap who's actually a mayor in Florida now, 7 foot giant of a wrestler. I wanted to interview him since literally day one because he is a very, very proud parent to an autistic son. And his son's non-verbal autistic, 12 years old, the same age as my son. He's autistic, and he's done a lot in the community and in the neurodiverse world about championing that. So from day one, I wanted to have him on. Could never find a way to connect to him. He's got millions of followers, and being a public figure, very difficult to reach. We now chat regularly because my next book, which I'm working on with another Mark, another wrestler called Mark, they're really good friends, and he's contributing to the next book, and we connected, and we had a wonderful conversation last week for well over an hour where his son came in at multiple times, where we talked all about the challenges of parenting with autism. It's just happened when it was supposed to happen. And it didn't happen because I cold pitched him. And it's funny because when he started following me back, now that we're connected on social media, I realised there was a message from 3 years ago in his DM saying, "I'm Ben, I host the Wrestling Life pod, I'd love to have you on to talk about your son." And obviously he'd never seen it, because when you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers on social media, you don't see these messages generally unless you get lucky. So things happen when they're supposed to happen. And I'm positive the conversation we had was better for it, because I'm much better at interviewing now than I was 3 years ago. Because I've learned a lot along the way about what to do and what not to do, and I'm still learning.
That's so beautiful, right? You have someone in mind, and you then have a conversation with them, and then you have that they become your friend.
Yeah.
And it seems that everything, from what I'm hearing, is everyone you've come across with, everyone who sat across from you, everyone who you've talked with, everyone who has had a conversation with you, has not just had a positive experience, but also you've become friends. Good Journeys, the wrestling podcast. It's so incredible. And
Well, yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think there is obviously still a transactional nature to it. It is a podcast episode. It's a piece of content. It's a moment in time. I have tried as much as possible to kind of then continue that relationship. Certainly the book helped because that gave another link. Certainly even the wrestling space, yeah, I've developed some, what I would say, some genuine friendships in a world that is quite hard to build friends. I'm also aware that I am useful, and I think that is something that I remind myself is I do have friends who are wrestlers, but I'm also well aware that at the moment I'm providing a useful service. I am a content creator. I'm giving them good things to promote themselves. So I do also know where I fit. I know at the end of the day, there are friends and then there are friends. And there are professional acquaintances and friendships you make through work and content creation. And then there are other people you can phone up at midnight when there's a crisis with one of your children and you need help. And my core friendship circle is very, very small. I'm very, very guarded about who I let into the people who see my actual real life is very, very small. The people who I count as genuine friends. But I certainly think I am friendly and on nice terms with, I'd like to think, no one has ever come away from an interview with me thinking that was a waste of time. Because I think that's your biggest fear when you're doing this, is you invite someone into your space and it's a bad experience and you don't get on, and there's no I've definitely had interviews where there's been almost zero chemistry and where it's felt hard, but I feel like I've always just about managed to overcome that. I've definitely had a few where and this is the Zoom thing again, because you can't shake someone's hand, offer them a cup of tea, sit down with them for 15 minutes. You kind of dive straight in. So I've had a few which haven't felt like they've had a great chemistry, but you always find the common thread in the end.
I think you're right. I think a couple of things. I think number one, yeah, there's that difference between friends and friends, and it makes sense that we as people have a core group of people we trust. That's normally much smaller. But I do like I do have this sort of like idea that yes, you might not be friends, but yes, you are providing a service that's useful to them. But you're not. I don't think from the chat we're having right now and from seeing your content out there, it doesn't seem like it's just that. And I think when people come in contact with you, it's not just that at the end they get some piece of content that you then collaborate on and they get that sort of benefit, but then they see that actually I've enjoyed the conversation. And then you say it yourself, if it was hard in your first year, but then wrestlers would then message other wrestlers and say, I went to the Ben's podcast, it was really good, you should go as well.
Yeah.
And I think just goes to show that yes, you've provided a useful service, but you've also earned their trust. And you've done that because you were interested in the human element and in their story and in the moments you were obviously interested in, rather than the end result.
Yeah.
And that comes across, right? So that's one thing I sort of like wanted to say, because it's very important. And yes, I've had that moment as well where you sit across from someone and there's zero chemistry. And I had a guest that sort of like felt like that at the end, and I tried to like understand why that was, and the first conclusion I came to, was a very, how can I say it? It was a very, I can't find the word now, but it wasn't a nice conclusion. The conclusion I came to was, it was their fault. Like, why aren't you interesting? It was not their fault, because it was my fault. It was soon after I realized, wait a second, I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't put them in a position where they can be interesting. I didn't put them in a position where they can take part in creating that chemistry. So that's what I sort of like learned from the early episodes, for example. And there were moments, like I remember episodes where I would have like, again, a list of like questions. I'll be like, let me try and go to that, and then it didn't feel right. And then there were episodes where I was like, I had this really cool person on, and I still think that that episode was good. Like I got some really cool things from them, but I didn't have anything prepared for that episode. So I was like, I was going through some extremes. Like, how can I over prepare, and then how can I under prepare, and like just see how it goes. And I think I'm trying to like find a sweet spot at the moment, and it's going quite well.
Yeah, and it does depends on who you interview, and some people give you a lot more to work with. Some people you might only need to have 4 questions and they'll happily talk for an hour and you won't get a word in, and that's fine. Some people won't give you much, and so you've got to have some questions prepared. You've got to have something in your back pocket. But I think for the where it goes wrong with the world of podcasting is when you're so focused on getting your own questions in that you don't actually allow the forks in the road. And the brilliant thing about the human mind, going back to what we were saying about AI, the brilliant thing about human minds, it does get pulled in weird and wild directions. And we might be talking about something and then I'll just go off on a random tangent, because that's how the human brain works. And you have to allow for an element of that. And that, again, is what I like about podcasting against any other format of interview. There isn't the constraint. You might say, yeah, broadly, my podcast's an hour long, an hour and 15, whatever. But it doesn't have the same pressure that like 4 minutes on the sofa on This Morning or something has. Like, it's not about getting your messaging in. It's about flowing with it and seeing where it goes and seeing what you cover. And that's what I like about podcasting. It is raw. It doesn't matter how much you dress it up in post production, and you make beautiful reels and all that kind of stuff, but the raw content is the special thing. And I never edit my podcasts in terms of cutting anything out. I only will do it if there's like an interruption. So, for example, my son walks in, which occasionally happens because I often podcast at night with the time difference with America, or they need to go to the bathroom or whatever happens. But if there's an interruption in the filming, it'll get cut. But I won't edit anything out that anyone says or that I say, because I think, for better or worse, you can't edit life. You can't edit out if you said those things and you weren't being recorded. So I kind of always say to everyone at the start, like I establish ground rules with people. Is there anything you don't want to talk about? Because once we hit record, we're talking and it's going to go out. So I kind of think it's kind of on you once you've started. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it.
Pretty much. And you said something there that sort of like opens up now a different sort of like conversation. It's a bit more technical, this question actually. But I noticed one of the things you said was you've learned that there's a difference between asking the obvious question and asking a good question. How did you come to learn that? And if you can, let's start there and then I'll ask you some other questions with it.
So, I mean, if you take someone who's a public figure, who's done a lot of media, they will have been asked multiple times, what was it like to work on that film? What was it like to work with that actor? What was it like to, produce that album, sing that song, have that football match, whatever it was? What they might not be asked was, you were away in Singapore doing that shoot for 6 months' time. How did you keep in touch with your kids during that time? What was your relationship like with your wife? Did you actually enjoy the day-to-day of doing that? How hard is it to lose weight for a role, to look in this kind of condition? Going back to the wrestling thing, but how hard is it to be away from your family 330 days a year, entertaining other people's children whilst your own children are growing up without a father? They are the questions that don't get asked enough, and they're often the questions people want to talk about. Generally, if you just focus on the obvious question, which is, oh, you've got a new book out, or you've got a new song, or whatever it may be, you will get the top level stock answer that the person is planning to say, which is fine, because that is the reason they've probably come onto your podcast in many respects. It's what comes after that. So it's a bit like playing a game of chess. You have to get both set pieces in. So, and guests know, especially with Wrestling Life, they know that I will be asking them about certain key moments, so key matches, key things. They know the game. We talk about that before. I explain to them, we're going to do some real deep, real life stuff at the beginning and the end. And in the middle bit, I'll be asking you about certain matches and moments, because they know that without talking about those matches and moments, people will never hear the important stuff that matters to them. It's a bit like when you go to a gig and the band has to play the greatest hits, because if they just play their old songs, then no one will listen. So it's about digging a bit deeper, I think, and thinking like, what would I like to be asked? But it's also about keeping questions really, really simple. One of the biggest mistakes I made, and I still do from time to time out of nerves, you kind of ask 3 questions at once. So you kind of bombard the interviewee with a bit too much, and it can be quite hard to answer. So actually being really focused on your question is a really key thing, as is silence. I was taught silence is really important in podcasting, to just let conversations breathe, to allow for a little bit of uncomfortable silence, because often that's where the gold is, and to not necessarily inject too much of yourself. And I think you do a good balance of that. I think it's really important to, because I don't talk anywhere near this much on my own podcast. I talk maybe 10 to 15% of the show is me. I don't want it really to be about me. I'm there as I'm the introducer. I'm there to present the person, not to talk about me.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. There's that when you're, I guess, yes, when you're a host, your job is to facilitate.
Yeah.
And I remember back when maybe a year or 2 years ago, or maybe during my placement actually back in 2022, someone gave me some feedback, and it was very specific, and it's exactly like you said. I used to bombard people with, I used to ask question. I used to start asking a question, then finish up my question with another 2 or 3 questions. And the guy said to me that I do that, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then I became aware, and I was like, oh, I've done it now. I need to do it less and less. And then, and in addition to that, like you said, there's always that element of silence and being happy with like just sit there and don't say anything, because often what you realize as well now is yes, when you just show up and you let the person talk, at some point there will be a silence, but often in that silence they will say something else, because people feel the need to fill the silence, and you'll feel the need to fill it up, and when you do, it might be that's where the gold is.
Yeah.
It's very beautiful.
So, but you find it through experience, and I've done a lot now, and nothing compared to podcasters who have been doing this for decades. I mean, I got into this in 2022, so I was late. You're late to the game, I'm late to the game, but there is room for everyone to do their own thing. But I'm still learning. I'm 150, about 150 episodes in or so between the two shows, so I'm still learning, and hopefully in a year or two, my style will have evolved a bit more and a bit more. You just kind of go with it over time.
Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? Because you've got Second Mountain, which you started a while ago. You've got Good Journeys. You've got your wrestling podcast. You're writing books. You also said you're around 40.
Yeah.
So where do you want to go?
I think I have come to the conclusion in the last year that more than anything, I just want a happy family and a healthy and content life. I think I've spent a long time trying to be seen in a certain way by people, to get the validation of others or respect of others, to get the respect of myself, to achieve things. And I don't honestly know what else I've got to achieve, because I have done, and it sounds really strange to say that because it sounds really egotistical, but it's not, but I have done the things that I wanted to do when I was a little boy. I interview wrestlers and I've become friends with wrestlers. In career, I've won awards, I've had promotions, I've written books, I've done all the things. A lot of those things haven't brought me joy at all. And I've definitely come to the conclusion, I mean, this is a recurring theme in a book as well, but I've come to the conclusion that the acquisition of achievements does not bring happiness. The only thing that brings happiness is being content with exactly where you are. And for me at the moment, at this stage of where I am, 2026, I'm really focused on just being trying to be a good dad, trying to be a good husband, and trying to be happy in myself, and trying to get to know myself a bit more. I'm actually pausing wrestling life for a little bit, at the request of my son, who is 7, and he came to me one day recently and he said, Dad, you're always podcasting, you're never around with me. And that really, really crushed me, because I write a lot in the book about my relationship with my own father and how I felt a lot of times as a child growing up that he was absent because he had his own pursuits. And I just realised I'm just following exactly the same pattern that I had a lot of resentment for a long time. And so podcasting is always going to be there. There are always going to be wrestlers to interview. At this exact window of time, I need to be with my son. And I explained to him, because I think it's important to role model, I explained to him I'm not stopping because I've built something and I'm really proud of it. It's something I've worked really, really hard to do. But I will pause it because you've asked me to. And so to do that, I have basically recorded 3 months. I've got my last, so we're recording this on a Friday. On Sunday this weekend, I've got my last podcast interview. And that is then all of my content until the end of September. So the show will continue to go out on schedule. It doesn't pause to the outside world. It keeps going out. But what I've done is created a 11 or 12 week window where I'm not interviewing anyone else, where they won't hear I've got to prepare for a podcast now, and my energy can be where it needs to go. It can go into sharing the episodes and creating the reels and all that, all the back end post production. I'm not interviewing other people, and I'm hoping in that silence, I can take a bit of time to think, where do I want this to go going forward, to make sure that it's right for me, right for my family. Because if any of this stuff doesn't work for my family, then it's, at the end of the day, it doesn't work. And so, I do have, 2 kids with additional needs who need a lot of time. I am self-employed. I am trying to do a really, really good job for my clients. I'm also trying to look after my own health and well-being, and I can't do everything. And I've been dangerously close to burnout on a few times. So now I'm just trying to really think long game, because I would like to write more books. I would like to be interviewing more people on the podcast, but there isn't a end goal. I'm never going to have the top wrestling podcast in the world. I'm never going to have, the top inspirational podcast in the world. There isn't really the problem with doing what we do is there isn't ever a win. Even if you did have the top wrestling podcast in the world, you'd then have to keep the top wrestling podcast in the world. So you can't get to an end. And I think sometimes you have to set a pause period. And so for me, I've been podcasting this summer for 4 years straight, and I just need a bit of time off. And now feels like a good time to do it when it's summer and we should all be having time off anyway.
That must have been such a emotional moment when he came up to you and said, I want you to spend more time with me because I think you're doing a bit too much.
Yeah.
And he's 7, you said, right? Yeah. For a 7-year-old to have the clarity to even to say it out loud and point out what you're doing, I find unbelievable. I'm impressed by it. I don't know how you felt in the moment, but
I just thought you've been able to say the words that I couldn't say to my own dad, really. And maybe what if I'd said that when I was 7 or 8 to my own dad, would our relationship have shifted? But I needed to hear it. He's right. I have got obsessed, and it will do me good to have a summer. And it's great because you'll get this because of how you approach this. It's almost a job in itself, finding new guests for your podcast. You are constantly looking and seeing things and going, that could be a guest, and you're constantly kind of hyper aware and think, oh, I should message that person. For 3 months, I don't have to do that now. And I have been doing that solidly for 4 years. For 3 months, if I see a perfect potential guest, I just won't contact them. And so be it if I miss a perfect interview at some point between July and September, which I inevitably will. That perfect interview will go elsewhere. But who's to say that I won't get it 3 years down the line when I'm in a really good place for it? So I'm kind of looking long. I'm looking long games. I would love to have written many books. I'd love to continue on the journey I'm on. I'd love to meet more amazing people, but it only works if I take some pauses. And so I'm going to be much better about summer going forward, much better about Christmas. I think I've worked and created content over Christmas for the last 4 years. Actually slowing down when the world slows down isn't a bad idea. And so this summer I will actually be on the beach, not with my phone, not on Instagram. I will delete all my social media apps and I will actually have a break. And I can't wait, to be honest.
It's really nice to have that pause. And I am going through it where I do look out and I do see that, oh, that could be a good person, or that could be a good guest, or with the parties I'm doing, or even with I'm doing another thing at the moment, which all these things take time. And it's not necessarily that they take time, they take mental capacity. And once you sort of, like you're saying, once you're allowing yourself to take a pause, you allow yourself to re-enjoy everything else, and it's so nice. And I'm so excited for you. This is so cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I am, because to take it back to basics, I haven't listened to a podcast in about 2 years. the thing which got me into podcasting, I never listen to anyone else's podcasts anymore because I'm constantly fizzing with my own energy and I'm struggling to switch off. So I've just downloaded a few of my old favourite podcasts and I've just downloaded them to go out for intentional walks again. And I don't watch any wrestling because it's become a job. Well, actually, I'm looking forward to having some evenings where I watch old 80s wrestling, which is what I used to do for fun. But just generally, just having more time with the kids and just not being online, not walking around glued to my phone. Sorry, excuse me. Which is just a constant thing, I'm just constantly like on my phone, and I've got so into like working around American time zones, and you find wrestlers generally tend to be afternoon creatures anyway, and so I'll often get a flurry of activity on my social media and in my inbox from like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, because it's kind of like noon West Coast time or early afternoon East Coast, and it throws it off because by 8 o'clock I should be stopping. Like I should have stopped several hours ago. Often my work day, it feels, starts at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and I'm just getting better at being like, oh, I'll just pick it up tomorrow. Just like put my phone away and be like, well, they can't speak to me today because I live in the UK and this is my time and it's too late. So I'm trying. I mean, there's a long way to go, but I am. The only way to make it sustainable is to make it work for me, and that's the same, I'd say, for anyone. Like, if you're creating some kind of passion projects, if you're just starting up a business, or you're a sole trader and you just like want to kind of move forward with your company, it's like it's got to work for you, it's got to work for your family, and it's got to always be, at the end of the day, it comes back to that whole purpose thing. The purpose of why I became self-employed was 6 years ago. It happened because I was made redundant and so my hand was forced in the pandemic, but I could have got another job. I chose it because I felt beforehand that I hadn't been able to have enough flexibility to be with my children. I was missing my kids' bedtimes. I wasn't there ever at home in the evenings. I was missing family meals. I was missing breakfasts. And I was like, I want to see my kids grow up. And in a large way, what I've ended up doing for the last few years is just I filled myself up to the fact that I work even more hours than when I worked in an office in Bath. So sometimes you just have to go, well, I've made some missteps, but I don't have to keep making them. And I think, if I carried on the path I'm on, I might have some amazing podcast awards to come, and I might interview some incredible A-list guests, and I might make lots of money from it, but I might also not have a very strong relationship with my sons, and then what's the point of the entire thing? So I think it'll make me better for it, and I think when the show returns, it will return in a more manageable schedule, which might mean there's less go out a month. It's fine. It might just mean that it's quality over quantity much more. And I think that's the beauty of when you do something for like you doing this, me doing my show. This can become whatever you want it to become, but it's got to be what feels right to you. And so for Good Journeys, that was bringing in Sarah and completely evolving the format. And for Rest of Life, it might be a lengthy pause and then it comes back in a different way. It might be that it could be in a year's time I don't podcast anymore and I just write wrestlers' books. That would be amazing because that was my dream. And so it might be that the podcast was the stepping stone to becoming a niche sports writer. And if that's the case, then fine. I think you just have to accept that nothing is forever, and it's the beauty of creativity, isn't it? But it's all a bit fluid.
I think it's beautiful what you're doing. I think going back to the beginning, you're showing people's journeys and you're having natural conversations with them, and you're just showing people how interesting they are, and you're reminding that to them as well, because it's hard sometimes for us to pat ourselves on the back. It's hard for me as well. Like, don't get me wrong, sometimes I do think I do get like drawn, like you said earlier, into people have not watched this reel. What do I need to do, or how can I make the conversation better? How can I make the podcast better? But it goes back to, why am I doing this? To meet people. Am I meeting someone right now? Yes. That's the win then.
Yeah.
That's okay. I guess final question for me is there anything that you would like to add, or is there anything that I guess the question here is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you yet?
You tell me. I don't know. I love where this conversation's gone. I think this is exactly what this is all about. I think the environment that you've invited me into, the care and attention you've taken, the way you approach the whole thing has been great, and I'm really excited personally to see. I'm glad we've met. I'm really excited to follow your journey now. I think you're doing things absolutely as you should, and I think you're going to go far with this. You've just got to make sure that wherever you go is kind of where you want to go, really. And that's kind of my learning is don't set goals, but don't be rigid about it, because who knows what this could become for you. But I'm really excited, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope that I've added some value, because I know it's all about adding value. I hope it's helpful, and I just I want people to take away the fact that you can. It doesn't matter kind of where you think you might be ended up going with success in life. You're going to go all sorts of weird and wacky ways on the road to it. There's going to be many forks in the road. You're going to go off all sorts of tangents. But if it's something that you genuinely feel passionate about and that you believe in, just keep trying to follow towards that end goal. Just keep, that was a very kind of spurious way of trying to say that. But, I, from a young age, I wanted to write stories about people. That is what I've ended up doing. But it's certainly not been a smooth journey to get to where I am now. And who knows what I will be doing in 5 years' time in this crazy world of AI and everything, that's going on right now. Who knows what I'll be doing in 5 years' time. But at the moment, I'm really, really excited about what I'm doing in work. And I'm even more excited about the opportunity that kind of awaits at home.
Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the one thing that will end the podcast now, have you listened to any of the episodes?
I've listened to all of them.
Yes.
Is that the right thing to say?
That's the right thing to say.
I will do, because I'm now listening to podcasts again, if that helps.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah. I've got here, I know you've got 2 kids, and I know obviously you've got a wife. What I've got here for you is 4 chocolate bars.
Ooh.
And they're my gift to you.
Thank you
and
very
there's a
much.
story behind them.
Okay, thank you.
And the story goes like this.
Can I eat them now?
You can eat all of them now. You don't have to share with your family. That's cool. There's a story behind them, and the story goes like this. So, remember when you were a kid? We would have chocolate bars, right? I would have a chocolate bar, and I remember always thinking, after taking the first bite and then the second bite, this chocolate bar doesn't have enough chocolate. Fast forward to high school, one of my friends, she comes up to me and she says, "Luca, have you tried this chocolate bar?" I was like, "No, I haven't." "Can I have it, please?" "Yes." She gives me the chocolate bar, and on the first bite, it had so much chocolate and it was so good. Since, I don't know, 2016, 2017, it's become my favorite chocolate bar. Okay. I give it to everyone. So hopefully today you will
Try for it.
go for it. I'm telling you, have you still got water? Because it's got so much chocolate. It's
I want to
so
see
good.
what this chocolate bar is. I'm not going to eat it now. I will have it with my movie tonight.
Absolutely.
Oh, a dare. Okay. Yeah.
Hopefully it's still. I had to put them in the fridge.
It's actually surprisingly non-squishy. Yeah, I've still got to get it home.
Yeah.
Let's see what it ends up with. But yeah. Oh, I'm excited by that.
Yeah.
A dare chocolate bar.
It's originally, I believe, it's a Turkish chocolate. They said I'm from Romania, by the way. And they said all over Romania in the shops. And it's been hard to find in the United Kingdom. At first I was able to find it in a store in Birmingham and have them ship it over. I've managed to now find it in Bath as well. If you're aware, there is the International Food Market.
Yeah, yeah.
So now they have it as well. They every now and again they order 4 boxes from London. And every time they do, I buy 2 boxes. So I buy 50 chocolate bars.
Thank you so much.
But now, if you do love it, They have it at Morrison's apparently.
Amazing.
So it's accessible. Finally, yeah, that's been my dream for it to be accessible.
Oh, well, I'm very excited. And we're having our family movie night tonight, so that is the perfect accompaniment. But was one thing you asked me that one thing to finish on, and it's just reminded me because I brought my little thing of props. We talked about this off air, but so this has been sitting here in my office for 3 years. This is an award which won't mean much to many people, but for a few it does, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Relations Excellence Awards for Independent PR Practitioner of the Year. Now, this is essentially for what I do in a job. This is the Oscar. This is like the top thing you can get. This is what I thought I was always working towards for years and years. I thought I could never ever be a person who could win this. The year I won it in 2023, I won it within a week of my dad dying. And I remember the organisers phoning me up and saying, are you going to come to the awards in London? I was like, no. And they were saying, you really should come. You really should be there. I'm like, no. They're like, we really need you there. I was like, well, look, you tell me, have I won? They're like, well, we can't tell you, but read between the lines. I'm like, well, it's irrelevant because I don't want to be there. You know, my dad's just died and I don't feel like it. And I won, and I guess I got a little bit of an endorphin boost on the night, but not anything major. This thing arrived a few weeks later in a box, and I opened it on my own. And, you know, it's beautiful. It has a nice spot in my office, but it just made me realise for so many years, this was what I was working for. This was everything. This was the goal. And when it arrived, it meant very, very little because I'd suddenly realised what was actually important in life, which is family and cherishing time with your loved ones. So I kind of wanted to bring this along as a reminder today that actually the things that you maybe are journeying towards are not necessarily the things that should have your focus. Maybe just actually appreciate being alive today, enjoying this beautiful sunny day we've got, being with your family and being healthy, because everything else works out in the end. And I think that's the one thing I've learned from many, many good journeys, a lot of wrestling life, and 40 years on this planet.
Ben, that's so beautiful. We'll end it there. Thank you.
Thanks.